Oh my gosh, I'm very excited to be talking to you. And look, there's a lot here, and one of the things that I like about the work you've done and the writing you've done is that you take on some of the headwinds associated with vaccines and these controversies. You take them on straight up, and I love that because I really have seen uh, a level of disinformation that I would never see, thought that I'd see around health. And again, look, I'm vaxxed up, although I think I need a pneumonia vaccine, they tell me, and also a shingles vaccine. But the vaccines that really led the parade of controversy, I feel as though they went to another level with COVID. So I'm going to get you right into the conversation with that, please, and then we can also digress or move around. But can you just speak to the COVID-19 vaccine, the claims of RFK Jr. that he's not happy that there weren't double-blind studies made? I mean, I'm kind of doing a reducto on a lot of what he said, but there were double-blind studies done on COVID-19 vaccines, and the technologies, as I was reading, were well established.
Of course, I think people see Operation Warp Speed as, which was probably badly named because it suggested that timelines were cut, or worse, the safety guidelines were ignored. Really, the mRNA vaccines really began in 1997 when people like Drew Weissman and Katie Carrico were funded by NIH. So it's more than 20 years of sort of the research of development, if you will. And then when SARS-1 hit, 2002, 2003, there were internal researchers at NIH like Barney Graham who were working on an mRNA vaccine for SARS-1, but the virus never came into this country. So by the time SARS-CoV-2 came into this country in January 2020, we were really fairly far along. Operation Warp Speed was really a production program more than a research and development program. And it was subjected to the same sort of large prospective placebo-controlled trials any adult or pediatric vaccine would be subject to. 40,000 people for Pfizer, 30,000 people for Moderna. I mean, I'm on the FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee. We looked at those data, and we got, by the way, 400 pages of data to review before each of those two vaccines.
No, I know you read every page of that 400-page review.
So I'm not sure where he's going. RFK Jr. said that the COVID vaccine is the most dangerous vaccine ever made. He just makes it up.
And I'll get to the origins of COVID in a second. I want to get your impressions on that. But vaccine pushback, Dr. Paul Offit, is not a new thing, right? I mean, it goes back literally to the beginnings of vaccines.
Yeah, back to the smallpox vaccine. That was the birth of the Anti-Vaccination League, and there was a picture by James Gilray in 1804 where you see Edward Jenner sort of standing among this group of people who are looking fearful, and he's looking disinterested while they are presumably taking on cow-like characteristics, like snouts and floppy ears and tails, because people were scared of this, vaccine, which really was derived from cows.
The vaccine. The various vaccines do have different derivations and different technologies. I was reading about when it first happened, COVID, and the vaccine came out. I remember I choked down quickly, so I may be, there may be gaps in my recollections about CRISPR and the ways in which they do that mRNA re-engineering. It's a fascinating thing, but that's a very different kind of vaccine than, let's say, the polio vaccine.
No, it's a novel technology. I mean, previously when we made viral vaccines, we did, for example, what was done with polio, take the whole virus and kill it with a chemical. That's the way the hepatitis A vaccine is made. Or you take a virus and weaken it by passing it in cells in a laboratory, like the measles, mumps, German measles, chickenpox, rotavirus vaccines are made that way. Or you just take one protein from the virus, and that's the way the hepatitis B vaccine is made, or the human papillomavirus vaccine is made. But it was always part of the virus. I think what happened here that was different is you weren't giving the virus or a part of the virus. You were just giving the gene, in this case messenger RNA, that coded for one of the proteins of the virus, in this case the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein or fusion protein, and then that mRNA would enter your cell and join about 200,000 other pieces of mRNA that are making the enzymes and proteins necessary for life. And for a few days it would make that protein, and you would make an immune response to that protein.
One of the things that I think was lost in all of this, and maybe this is just my sense of it, you can tell me, was the fact that the landscape was changing when it came to what we knew about COVID, meaning how to treat it, how effective the vaccine would be in preventing transmission. All of these things seem to be changing. The message around it was changing. There was a sense that that was a get out of jail free card initially, that you'd get the shot and you wouldn't have to worry about getting COVID anymore. And then it was, well, it won't be that severe when you get it. It'll keep you out of hospitalizations, et cetera. And I ascribe that to the fact that there was and it was well reported that there was a mutation going on, that the virus itself was changing. I have two questions then. Please speak to that if you would, sort of the changing nature of the science, if you will, and what you're getting from the scientific community, what the public is getting, this kind of changing message. And also, if there hadn't been, I've always wanted to ask this question, if there hadn't been a mutation, Dr. Paul Offit, would that initial inoculation have actually done what was sort of advertised, which is kept everyone from getting COVID who had the vaccine?
No, it wouldn't have. I think what was confusing to people, and we could have been better at messaging this, when we looked at the data, for example, in December of 2020 for the Pfizer trial and Moderna trial, those vaccines were each about 95% effective at preventing severe disease. They were also 95% effective at preventing mild to moderate disease. There's no way that was going to last. This is a short incubation period, meaning from the time you're exposed to the virus to when you develop symptoms, mucosal infection. So therefore, if you're going to try and prevent mild or moderate disease, you need antibodies in your circulation. But antibodies fade, so that by 6 months later, you didn't have 95% protection against mild or moderate disease. The reason you did in those trials is those were 3-month studies. People had just gotten their second dose of vaccine, so they still had high antibodies levels. And we should have said that right at the beginning. The goal of this vaccine is to keep you out of the hospital, keep you out of the intensive care unit, keep you out of the morgue. You might still get a mild or moderate infection, which isn't trivial. You may have a couple of days of fever, have to stay home, and a hacking cough. You may feel miserable. And I think we need to make that clear. And also to make it clear that although the vaccine will decrease the amount of time that you're shedding virus and decrease the amount of virus that you're shedding, you still could transmit that virus. And I think we were so desperate to get people vaccinated because in 2021, you were 12 times more likely to be hospitalized and die if you didn't get that vaccine than if you did. And our hospital, among many, were overwhelmed with this virus. So I think we tended to oversell it a little bit.
I think that's exactly right. I think the messaging was poor. It's really a shame because it was so breakthrough. And it's one of the things that I give Trump credit for. I mean, I thought he ramped up that Operation Warp Speed with government money. I mean, the remarkable amount of money that went into, I think one of the companies didn't go for the money, Merck was it maybe, but the rest of the development was done with that government money on a time frame that was just remarkable. I don't know why Trump kind of ended up backwalking that, because he'd done a great thing.
I agree. I think, I'm in my medical lifetime, which includes, by the way, the development of the polio vaccine, I think this was the most remarkable medical or scientific achievement in my lifetime. And it's amazing that he didn't take credit for it. He could have called it the Trump vaccine, but I think maybe at his heart, he's just a very modest man who doesn't like to put his name on it.
That's it. Yeah, that's right. What were the origins of COVID in your view?
I think this was an animal to human spillover event, just like SARS-1 was, just like MERS was, just about like 70% of the other viruses or bacteria we have are. And the reason I would say this is that when there was a lot of misunderstanding about what China would and wouldn't let us do. I mean, they weren't great about letting international teams of scientists come in and evaluate, number one. Number two is that they killed the animals, all the animals, by January 1st. So you didn't have those animals to look at. But what you did have is you did have sort of the Chinese scientists going on and swabbing in the southwestern section of the Hunan wholesale seafood market, things like cages and things that would be used to brush the animals or kill the animals or tables. And you found that virus. You found SARS-CoV-2 virus there. You also knew that the original cases were all in that southwestern section and then spread out from there. So you knew that. You knew it was also 2 separate lineages. So it was really 2 different viruses. And by the way, animal to human spillover events occur all the time. I mean, if you look, for example, in rural China, where people are living in sort of closer association to the bats, about 1 in 40 people in rural China will have been infected with the bat coronavirus. It just happened to hit in the right place at the right time to take off. But I think all the evidence is that supports the notion that this, like so many viruses, is an animal to human spillover event. It's true of Ebola. Ebola was a bat virus. Mpox is a rodent virus. HIV was a human immunodeficiency virus. It's a simian virus. So that's flu is a bird virus. So it's what you usually see. I think to say it was a lab leak is to say that something happened that has never happened before in human history, which is that scientists in a lab created a virus that went on to kill tens of millions of people. You need to have more evidence if you're going to claim that. What I like about the animal to human spillover event people, the evolutionary biologists like Michael Warby and others, is they publish their data in Nature, Science, Cell. So it's a scientific question. It has to be answered in a scientific venue or in the cauldron of a scientific venue. Submit your data for peer review, because otherwise you're just dealing with innuendo and conspiracy.
Well, that's scientific data. My Uber driver is pretty sure that it was just somebody left the door open at the lab. Was it? I mean, you kind of described well. It was a constellation of things around the Chinese and their lack of transparency that, frankly, just it fueled suspicion, Paul.
Exactly right. We shouldn't. First of all, we shouldn't have had to have depended on a whistleblower, that ophthalmologist, to say that there was a virus that was circulating in China that was killing people. Two is they were that wet market in Foshan and Guangdong province in 2002, 2003 was the source of SARS-1, which also swept across the globe and killed or infected thousands and killed hundreds of people. It just never came here. But so you knew that they were selling the kind of animals that could be intermediate hosts between bat and human. You knew that happened with SARS-1 also in China. You knew that with this wet market in Hunan, in Wuhan, but it's the Hunan wholesale seafood market. You knew that they were selling animals illegally. You knew that they were in under sanitary or hygienic conditions. It was waiting to happen. And I just wish they had owned up to it very quickly, let international teams of scientists come in and see what was going on, and not kill all the animals initially so you lost that information.
Again, yet another thing in that constellation of things, as I say, that just only breeds suspicion. So I want to move to another controversy, which you've taken head on. As I say, that's one of the great things about your writing and what you've done. And I feel as though the scientific community could use more people like yourself. And I'm not just blowing sunshine because you're here, but I mean, we just talked about the fact that the messaging is troubled. It was troubled around the initial vaccine. It was troubled around masks and stuff. That whole thing. And you really had so much disinformation that a lot of the public just was looking to Fauci because he seemed to be the cut-through guy with some lucidity on things, and then even he was changing the message because perhaps of a changing landscape. But on autism and the tie between autism and vaccines, there has been this drumbeat, and it just gets louder and louder. And now you have in the highest position at HHS someone who is very much subscribed to that notion that autism and vaccines are linked.
I don't even know what to say at this point. I mean, you can argue that it's fair to raise the question, right? My child was fine. They got a vaccine. Now they're not fine. Could the vaccine have done it? That is an answerable question. You can answer that question by looking at children retrospectively who did or didn't get that vaccine. Make sure you control for confounding variables like socioeconomic background, healthcare seeking behavior, medical background. That study has been done for measles, mumps, rubella vaccine 24 times. 24 times in 7 countries on 3 continents involving tens of thousands of children. The results have always been the same. MMR vaccine does not cause autism. He still thinks it causes it. So what are you going to do? He's an anti-vaccine activist. He's a science denialist. He's a conspiracy theorist. And he now heads the most important public health agency in this country. This is hard to watch. I mean, the anti-vaccine people have usually been sort of screaming from the sidelines. Now they're making policy.
You wrote about the Wakefield study, the 1998 study. Wakefield is the high-profile doctor who helped to really fuel these flames of a connection between the MMR vaccine and autism. You do, as I say, write about it and knock it down. What were the problems with his study?
Well, it wasn't a study. That was the biggest problem. It was
Okay, all right.
12 children, 8 of whom had autism within a month of receiving the vaccine. Honestly, he might as well have published a paper on, 8 children who developed autism within a month of eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I mean, there was no control group. So we had no idea whether this was a coincidental association or a causal association. That can only be determined with a control group. Got the vaccine, didn't get the vaccine. So it should have never been published. I was published in an excellent general medical journal, The Lancet, and it was later retracted when it became clear that he actually had misrepresented biological data. He'd misrepresented clinical data. There were children who actually developed signs and symptoms of autism before they ever got that vaccine. He had a belief system. He was going to shoehorn data into that belief system, and he still holds that belief system. He still believes that MMR causes autism, and he pals around with RFK Jr., and they are, in the next few months, going to hold up some study that says, see, we were right. MMR causes autism. We've looked behind the curtain at the FDA and CDC. They've been lying to us all along, and then God help us, because they are going to go into that vaccine injury compensation program and do everything they can to try and compensate children who have suffered autism, period. And it's a fairly common disorder. So I really worry that in due time, you are going to see vaccines that are going to become less available, less affordable, and even more feared. And we're already paying the price for that. I mean, you have a measles epidemic that probably involves about 3,000 people, has already killed 3 people, including 2 healthy children. That equals the total number of measles deaths for the last 25 years in this country. This is only getting worse.
It sounds like, just even in talking about the history, like the Lancet publication of Wakefield really gave it a legitimacy that is hard to beat back. Was that, I don't mean to put too much blame at the feet of one place, but it seems as though that might have been a huge error.
Agreed. I say blame Richard Horton, the editor-in-chief of The Lancet. He was friends with Andrew Wakefield. He knew him. He liked him. He thought, well, let's just publish this, run it up the flagpole, see what happens. And he tried to lessen its impact by having an editorial that also appeared in that journal by Frank DeStefano and Bob Chen, who were CDC safety officers at here in Atlanta. And and they said, look, this is not a study. There's no control group. You can't make any claims about causality here that MMR actually causes autism. But it was off to the races. And I don't blame the media. They're seeing this paper that's published in a well-respected journal. They assume it's peer-reviewed. They assume there must be something to it. And we were off to the races. And in England, in the United Kingdom, thousands of parents chose not to vaccinate their children. Hundreds of children were hospitalized with measles, and 4 children died from measles. I would argue that paper probably killed 4 children. Because of its impact. And then it spread across the ocean, and Wakefield was here, and he was on all the morning and evening shows. He was on 60 Minutes. He's got that British accent, which
right.
we're all willing to sort of give ourselves back to.
Yeah, he presents well. You're right. Yeah. I want to just touch on something else that RFK Jr. really makes a big deal of. You see this over and over again. He talks about 72 different vaccines that we get now. It used to be we had 6, now we have 72, whatever. But I think 72 is the number. And there are a number of ways that he's played fast and loose with those numbers. But I wonder if you could just speak to the number of vaccines that we have in the pediatric strategy, and how those have changed through the years, and are there too many, et cetera?
So in the first few years of life, children get vaccines to prevent 14 different diseases. And we do ask a lot of parents in this country. We ask them to get as many as 25 inoculations during that time, as many as 5 shots at one time, to prevent diseases most people don't see, using biological fluids most people don't understand. But it's really not the number of vaccines that you get that matters. It's the number of immunological components in vaccines. And by immunological component, I mean like a viral protein, which can induce an immune response, or a bacterial protein, or a bacterial polysaccharide, which is that sort of complex sugar coating on bacteria. That's what matters. It's the number of immunological components that matters, because that's what people worry about. Am I overwhelming my child's immune system, or am I somehow perturbing my child's immune system? Well, if you add up the total number of immunological components in vaccines today, it's less than the one vaccine we got 100 years ago, which was the smallpox vaccine, which is the largest of the mammalian viruses. It has 200 immunological components. Today, we have fewer than 170 immunological components because we've had advances like protein purification, recombinant DNA technology. So we make purer, safer vaccines. But people don't see that. They see just the number of shots when they should be looking at the number of challenges in those shots.
And so the number of shots is the right number in your view. In other words, you're comfortable with, I don't know what the number actually is. I know it's not 72, but you're comfortable with the number of vaccines that a child is given at when they begin the vaccine protocol?
Yes, because I don't want my children to suffer those diseases. And if a vaccine that can be made that is safe and effective, then yes. I mean, my children are now in their early 30s, but they're not surprisingly fully vaccinated. Couldn't wait to vaccinate them because I don't want them to suffer these diseases.
We have Kim says a question. I'm sorry, Kim, I don't see it from Brett in the chat about Novavax vaccine. Is that it? Let me see if I can find it for you, doctor. What is your thought? Here, you can put it up. Yeah, do you want to put it up there? What are your thoughts on Novavax technology compared to mRNA technology and why it hasn't been approved for kids? Can you speak to this? What is Novavax technology?
So Novavax has a purified protein approach, which they make using recombinant DNA technology. It's the same technology that's used to make the hepatitis B vaccine, the same technology that's used to make the human papillomavirus vaccine. So we've been using these vaccines, hepatitis B, for like 30 years. So it's a well-worn technology. In fact, most people, or I should say most, some people prefer that because it is well worn, and they were concerned about mRNA because it wasn't well worn. So it's a well worn technology. The thing is, and I think it was a terrible term. The term is emergency use authorization. When these vaccines were approved, and I said this at the first committee meeting, can we have a different way to describe this? Because emergency use authorization sounds like we're doing this thing in a sort of slipshod manner. These vaccines were tested in the same manner as any vaccine would be tested, and we did it quickly, but we didn't do it any less thoroughly. And I just wish we had, and one of the reasons was Donald Trump gave $11 billion to a program to speed up production. I mean, I worked on a rotavirus vaccine for 26 years. It could have been a lot shorter if the government had given $11 billion to that effort.
Yeah, that does really speak to it. I mean, these things and these programs are spoken of even by RFK Jr. And I hate to keep referring to him, but he's like he's now at the head of the parade in these anti-vax movements. And now he's in government, as you say, influencing policy. I mean, dictating policy. But he talks about the fact that, it takes 20 years to develop a vaccine. And one of the reasons it takes 20 years, you're saying, is in part because of funding and just the scientific process, which is, administrative and political and economic.
Exactly. I mean, what the government did for COVID is they took the risk out of it for pharmaceutical companies. So normally you go through phase 1 trial, which is maybe a couple dozen people to make sure you have the right dose, the right dosing interval, the right number of strains in there. Then you go to the second phase, which is maybe a couple hundred people to make sure you don't have any serious common side effect problem. Then you go to the big phase 3 trial, the prospective placebo-controlled trial. In the case of, say, the Pfizer's vaccine, 40,000 people get, 20,000 get the vaccine, 20,000 don't. Then you build your manufacturing. Then you make your vaccine. You do it sequentially because you don't want to take a risk. If at any stage things go wrong, you're out. But what the government did was they just basically said, we will take the risk out of it for you. Move along. Just assume it's going to work. Move along. We're going to bet on 6 horses to win 1 race. And they made it much faster. Honestly, it was a tremendous scientific achievement. I marvel at the Trump administration for that achievement. I wish they would marvel at it themselves.
I agree. I always gave him credit for it. I just thought he should have been taking the victory lap all along. We had a serious health emergency and I took care of it, but instead he's become wrapped up with the anti-vax movement, and now, he's in this unholy alliance with RFK Jr. Dr. Paul Offit, I'm so honored to speak with you, and it's really just such a pleasure to have you in on the show. And I'm really hoping to have you in again. And because I didn't I left bird flu out for now. We're just up against time restraints. But I know that, sadly, the human race is it's being pinched by all of these externals, and the medical community is called upon to handle it. But the thing that I like about your work, as I mentioned, is that you're part of that medical community that is having to handle not only the work of science, but the work of PR. And it's important. I mean, how you get a message out to the public is critically important. And you and I have just touched on in this conversation the fact that might have been fumbled at the beginning of COVID. And once you've blown it, it's really hard to get it back. So I'm really hoping you come back and we can get into some of these other things as well.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Dr. Paul Offit, thank you, sir. Good
Hi,
stuff.
it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.